Have you ever wondered why so many spiritual traditions warn against the dangers of love? Why do monks renounce romantic relationships while seeking enlightenment? Why do ascetics isolate themselves in the mountains, far from family ties? For centuries, we have been conditioned to believe that the path to spiritual growth requires abandoning earthly attachments, especially romantic and family love. We have been repeatedly told that to reach the highest realms of consciousness, we must transcend human emotions, including love. This perception is so deeply rooted in our culture that we rarely question it. But is this dichotomy true? Are love and spirituality really opposing forces, irreconcilable in our existential journey? Or could this be one of the greatest illusions we inherited from our ancestors, a false dichotomy that has limited our understanding of what it means to be fully human? Behind this seemingly simple question lies one of the greatest dilemmas of the human condition, and its answer may fundamentally transform the way we live our lives. Today, we are going to challenge this deeply rooted belief and explore a perspective that may seem shocking to many: the idea that love and spirituality, far from being opposites, may be different manifestations of the same fundamental phenomenon. To understand this dilemma, we need to go back thousands of years. In early human communities, spirituality and love were not separate concepts. Paleolithic hunter-gatherers did not distinguish between their connection with nature, their family bonds, and their experience of the sacred. Everything was part of a continuous fabric of existence. When a hunter killed an animal, he performed a ritual to honor its spirit. When a mother breastfed her child, this was simultaneously an act of love and a sacred act that connected generations. Love and the sacred coexisted without contradiction. There was no separation between the mundane and the divine, between carnal love and spiritual devotion. It was only with the rise of agricultural civilizations and their organized religious systems that we began to see this artificial separation emerge. Around 3000 BC, with the development of writing and the first urban civilizations in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, formal religious hierarchies appeared. Priests and scribes began to codify spiritual experiences into sacred texts, established rituals and dogmas. And here something significant happens. Spirituality, which was once a direct and embodied experience, begins to transform into an abstract and intellectualized system. The body, with its desires and passions, begins to be seen as an obstacle to spiritual purity. Love, especially in its erotic dimension, came to be characterized as a force that traps humans to the earth, preventing their ascent to the divine. We see this clearly in Hindu asceticism, where renunciants abandon family and possessions in pursuit of liberation. We see it in early Buddhism, where detachment from all emotional ties is considered essential to achieving nirvana. We see it in Christian monasticism, where celibacy is valued as a superior path of devotion. This separation was not accidental. It served specific social and political purposes. In hierarchical societies, where population control and social stability were primary concerns, restricting and regulating sexual and romantic behavior through religious codes was an effective tool of governance. By elevating celibacy and renunciation as spiritual ideals, religious authorities also consolidated their power over the masses. After all, who could question the moral authority of someone who renounced the pleasures that ordinary people could not resist? The narrative of incompatibility between love and spirituality was not just a metaphysical interpretation, but also an instrument of power. Simultaneously, Western philosophy, particularly after Plato, established a rigid distinction between body and soul, between matter and spirit. Carnal love was relegated to the lower realm of the body, while spiritual love was idealized as the only one worthy of true aspiration. This Platonic dichotomy deeply influenced Christianity and, by extension, all Western thought. Saint Augustine, one of the fathers of the Church, transformed his own journey from libertinism to chastity into an archetypal model of spiritual evolution, further reinforcing the idea that human love is an obstacle to communion with God. This same division appears in different forms in the great Eastern traditions. In Hinduism, the 4 stages of life, ashramas, traditionally end with the phase of sannyasa, where the individual abandons all family ties to dedicate himself exclusively to the spiritual quest. In classical Buddhism, attachment, including romantic and family love, is identified as the root of suffering. Even in Taoism, which in many ways celebrates the naturalness of the body, we find texts warning against excessive passion as a drain of vital energy. This dichotomous view persisted for millennia and continues to influence our contemporary culture in subtle but profound ways. Even in modern spiritual circles, we often hear that emotional attachment is an obstacle to enlightenment. Contemporary gurus warn their followers about the dangers of losing themselves in relationships, suggesting that the true spiritual seeker must transcend such worldly connections. The idea that we cannot serve both human and divine love simultaneously remains deeply rooted in our collective psyche. But now we arrive at a crucial moment in human history where this ancient dichotomy is being fundamentally questioned. Modern neuroscience is revealing that our deepest experiences of love and our highest experiences of spiritual transcendence activate similar regions in the brain. Both involve the temporary dissolution of the ego boundaries that normally separate us from others and the world. Both deep love and mystical experience involve a state of surrender and connection that transcends our isolated individuality. Brain imaging studies show that during states of deep meditation and during moments of intense loving connection, we see decreased activity in the posterior parietal lobe, the area of the brain responsible for creating our sense of physical separation from the environment. In other words, both love and spirituality can lead us to transcend the boundaries of the isolated ego that normally define our experience. This suggests that at the most fundamental level, these experiences may not be opposites, but variations of the same basic human phenomenon. Our ability to transcend the limits of the separate self and experience connection with something greater. Historically, this unifying perspective was not completely absent. Mystical traditions within major religions often recognized the deep connection between love and spirituality. In Islamic Sufism, human love is seen as a reflection and a path to divine love. Sufi poets like Rumi regularly use erotic metaphors to describe union with the divine. In Hasidic Judaism, the joy of conjugal love is considered a form of spiritual devotion. In Tantric Hinduism, sexual union is transformed into a sacrament that can lead to enlightenment. Even in Christianity, mystics like Saint John of the Cross and Saint Teresa of Avila employed intensely erotic language to describe their experiences of religious ecstasy. So, what is really happening here? Why do so many established spiritual traditions insist on the incompatibility of love and spirituality, while mystical currents within those same traditions often see them as deeply intertwined? The answer may lie in a more subtle understanding of what truly constitutes love and spirituality in their highest forms. Perhaps the problem is not love itself, but certain forms of possessive and egocentric attachment that we often mistake for love. Love, in its most mature and evolved expression, is not possessive or exclusive. It does not seek to control or dominate. It does not depend on the other to fill an internal void or validate one's own worth. True love is expansive, generous, and liberating. It is characterized by the same quality of open presence and acceptance that we find in the highest forms of spiritual consciousness. Likewise, perhaps the problem is not spirituality itself, but certain escapist and life-denying interpretations that we confuse with authentic spirituality. True spirituality does not require fleeing from the world or denying our humanity. It does not demand that we repress our capacity for connection and intimacy. In its most integrated and mature expression, spirituality allows us to fully participate in life, including its relational and emotional dimensions, while maintaining a broader awareness that is not limited by narrow identifications. Seen from this perspective, the apparent contradiction between love and spirituality begins to dissolve. Both, in their highest forms, involve an expansion of consciousness beyond the limits of the separate ego. Both involve a movement from separation to union, from fear to openness, from contraction to expansion. Both have the potential to free us from the prison of self-preoccupation and open us to a broader, interconnected reality. Technology and modernity have added new layers of complexity to this ancient question. We live in an era of unprecedented digital connectivity, yet many experience increasing levels of isolation and loneliness. We have more communication tools than any previous generation, yet we often feel less truly seen and understood. Romantic love has been simultaneously mythologized by popular culture and reduced to dating app algorithms. Spirituality has been commodified and packaged as just another lifestyle product for individual consumption. Amid this confusing landscape, many people are turning to simplified versions of both love and spirituality as quick fixes for a deeper existential malaise. Some seek salvation in romantic relationships, hoping that the perfect partner will heal all their wounds and fill all their internal emptiness, an expectation that inevitably leads to disillusionment. Others turn to spiritual practices as a form of escapism, hoping to transcend the complexities and challenges of human relationships, only to discover that these complexities follow them even in the most isolated retreats. Artificial intelligence is beginning to present new challenges in this domain. As we develop increasingly sophisticated AI companions designed to simulate empathy and understanding, we are entering uncharted territory regarding the boundaries between human connection and technological simulation. Some people already report forming deep emotional bonds with AI assistants, while others fear that these artificial connections may atrophy our ability for authentic engagement with other humans. The line between authentic spirituality and technological escapism is also becoming blurrier, with meditation apps and virtual reality experiences promising altered states of consciousness at the touch of a button. These developments raise profound questions about the nature of love and spirituality in the digital era. What does it mean to love in an age where intimacy is increasingly mediated by technology? How can we cultivate authentic spirituality in a world of infinite digital distractions? These are not abstract questions, but concrete dilemmas that shape our everyday experience as humans in the 21st century. I want to pause for a moment to ask, do you also feel this tension in your life? This apparent contradiction between your search for deep connection with other humans and your journey of spiritual growth? I know that for many of us, this tension is rarely articulated, remaining as an underground conflict that shapes our choices and relationships. Perhaps you have felt that you need to choose between dedicating yourself to a spiritual path or diving fully into human love with all its joys and complications. If this duality resonates with you, know that you are not alone. Share in the comments, I feel this conflict between love and spirituality when your experience may help others recognize and navigate this tension in their own lives. Sometimes, simply naming these internal dilemmas is the first step toward integrating them. Let us now return to the contradictions and paradoxes involved in this issue. One of the central ironies is that both spiritual traditions and romantic visions of love often promise the same thing: transcendence, meaning, liberation from suffering, union with something greater than ourselves. Both are presented as paths to overcome the fundamental alienation that seems to lie at the core of the human condition. Yet historically, they are often presented as mutually exclusive, as if we had to choose between the vertical transcendence of spirituality and the horizontal transcendence of human love. This apparent contradiction points to something profound about the nature of our search. Perhaps we are not really seeking two different things when we pursue love and when we pursue spiritual enlightenment. Perhaps we are looking for the same thing, a way to transcend the limitations of our separate existence, to overcome the sense of isolation that comes with self-conscious human awareness, to reconnect with a wholeness from which we feel separated. If that is the case, then the real question is not whether love and spirituality are compatible, but how they can be integrated into a more holistic approach to human development. Rather than seeing these dimensions as competing forces, pulling us in opposite directions, we could see them as complementary aspects of a unified path toward a fuller humanity. What might such an integration look like in practice? Perhaps it begins with the recognition that true love and true spirituality are both practices of opening and expanding consciousness. Both involve cultivating the capacity to be fully present, to see beyond projections and expectations, to offer radical acceptance. Both require that we confront and work through our fears, defenses, and conditioning patterns. Both invite us on a journey of self-knowledge and self-transformation. In practice, this could mean bringing the same quality of mindfulness that we cultivate in meditation to our intimate relationships. It could mean seeing our partners not merely as sources of personal gratification, but as other beings on their own spiritual journey, worthy of respect and reverence. It could mean recognizing that the challenges and frustrations that inevitably arise in close relationships are not obstacles to our spiritual growth, but opportunities for it, revealing aspects of ourselves that might remain hidden in the solitude of individual spiritual practice. Conversely, it could mean bringing the qualities we develop through human love, such as compassion, empathy, and the capacity for intimacy, to our spiritual search. It could mean recognizing that our connections with other human beings can be portals to transcendent and sacred experiences. It could mean understanding that our ability to love and be loved is not separate from our capacity to experience the divine, but an integral aspect of it. This integrated path is not easy. It demands that we face the challenges of both love and spirituality without seeking shortcuts or simplistic solutions. It demands that we stay present with the complexities, ambiguities, and paradoxes inherent in the human condition, rather than seeking refuge in dogmatic answers or escapist fantasies. It demands that we develop the capacity to live with open questions instead of rushing toward premature conclusions. On a collective level, this integration of love and spirituality has potentially profound implications for how we organize our communities and societies. Many of the crises we face today, from political polarization to environmental degradation, can be understood as manifestations of a more fundamental fragmentation in our consciousness, an inability to integrate the vertical and horizontal dimensions of our human experience. Spirituality without love can easily become arid, abstracted, and disconnected from the realities of human life. It can lead to a kind of spiritual narcissism where the pursuit of personal enlightenment becomes just another form of self-preoccupation. It can result in religious communities and institutions that, in the name of transcendent principles, perpetuate power hierarchies, exclusion, and even abuse. On the other hand, love without spirituality can easily degenerate into attachment, possessiveness, and codependency. It can become a sophisticated form of self-expansion where the other is valued primarily for how they make us feel or what they add to our identity. It can lead to relationships that, while emotionally intense, lack a deeper foundation of shared meaning and purpose. The integration of love and spirituality offers a path beyond these pitfalls. It suggests the possibility of a form of human existence that is simultaneously deeply engaged with the world of human relationships and capable of a broader perspective that transcends immediate egoic concerns. It points to the possibility of communities that are both intimately connected and oriented towards something that transcends their particular boundaries. Historically, we have seen glimpses of this integration in various contexts. We see it in monastic communities that combine individual contemplation with a strong emphasis on communal life and service to others. We see it in certain indigenous traditions where spirituality is intimately intertwined with family and community relationships. We see it in contemporary movements that seek to unite social activism with contemplative practices, recognizing that personal transformation and social transformation are inseparable. These historical experiences suggest that the integration of love and spirituality is not merely an abstract ideal, but a concrete possibility that has already been, at least partially, realized in diverse cultural contexts. They offer models and inspiration for our own efforts of integration, even as we recognize that each generation must discover this integration on its own terms, responding to the unique challenges and opportunities of its time. Looking to the future, it is possible that we are on the threshold of a significant transformation in our collective understanding of the relationship between love and spirituality. As old religious and social structures continue to dissolve, there is an unprecedented opportunity for new syntheses that transcend traditional dichotomies. Globalization and the internet are allowing dialogue and cross-fertilization between spiritual and philosophical traditions that were previously isolated. Science is offering new perspectives on the neurobiology of human connection and transcendent experience. The planetary crisis is catalyzing a growing recognition of the fundamental interconnectedness of all life. Amid these developments, we are seeing the emergence of new approaches that seek to integrate insights from diverse traditions with contemporary understandings of psychology, neuroscience, and complex systems. These approaches often recognize the profound interweaving of our capacities for interpersonal love, universal compassion, and transcendent consciousness. They suggest that optimal human development involves cultivating these capacities simultaneously rather than privileging one over the other. If we are indeed on the threshold of such a transformation, how do we navigate it wisely and effectively? How do we integrate love and spirituality into our individual and collective lives in ways that are genuinely emancipatory rather than merely repackaging all dichotomies in new language? How do we avoid both the false transcendence that denies our humanity and the false humanism that denies our transcendent capacity? These are not questions that can be answered definitively or once and for all. They are questions that each individual and each community must explore through ongoing inquiry and lived experimentation. They are questions that invite us on a journey of discovery that is simultaneously deeply personal and inherently collective. What we can say with some confidence is that the journey to integrate love and spirituality is one of the most important we can undertake, both for our individual flourishing and for the future of our species. In a world characterized by fragmentation, polarization, and converging crises, the capacity to unite the horizontal and vertical dimensions of human experience may be not only personally transformative, but collectively vital. Returning to the initial question, are love and spirituality incompatible? The answer that emerges from this exploration is a clear and unequivocal no. Not only are they not incompatible, but in their highest and most integrated forms, they are complementary expressions of the same fundamental human capacity to transcend the limits of the separate ego and experience connection with something greater. The apparent contradiction between them is not inherent to their nature, but an artifact of specific historical interpretations that served particular cultural and political agendas. Recognizing this does not diminish the real challenges involved in integrating love and spirituality into our lives. It does not magically remove the tensions that may arise between different aspects of our human experience. It does not offer a shortcut through the hard work of self-knowledge, relational growth, and spiritual seeking. What it offers is a more unified perspective that can guide us on this complex journey and help us avoid the pitfalls of fragmented and unbalanced approaches. In the end, perhaps the greatest irony is that the same spiritual systems that often warned against the dangers of love also identified love in its most expansive and universal form as the supreme fulfillment of the spiritual journey. God is love, declares the Christian tradition. Love is the religion and the faith, writes the Sufi poet Rumi. May all beings be happy, recites the Buddhist practitioner in their loving kindness meditation. These are not linguistic coincidences, but recognitions of the fundamental truth we have been exploring, that love, in its highest and most mature expression, is not an obstacle to spiritual realization, but its very essence. If you found value in these reflections on the integration of love and spirituality and feel that they touched something you have experienced in your own life, know that you are not alone on this journey. There is a whole community of people who, like you, are navigating the complex terrain of heart and spirit, seeking ways to honor both dimensions of their humanity without sacrificing either. By subscribing to this channel, you will connect with that community and gain regular access to explorations that seek to illuminate the existential challenges we all face in these extraordinary times. Each week, we delve together into another aspect of what it means to be human today, seeking perspectives that can help us live with more wisdom, presence, and wholeness. Join us on this ongoing journey of discovery and transformation. Subscribe so that we can continue this essential conversation about how to integrate all dimensions of our humanity into a more coherent and meaningful whole. Love and spirituality, far from being opposing forces in our lives, can be understood as different facets of the same fundamental human impulse toward connection and transcendence. When wisely integrated, they reinforce and enrich one another, leading to a form of human existence that is simultaneously more fully embodied and more deeply aware. This integration is not a fixed destination to be reached, but an ongoing journey to be lived, moment by moment, relationship by relationship, practice by practice. It is a journey worth undertaking, not only for the sake of our own fulfillment, but for the sake of a world that desperately needs human beings capable of uniting love and wisdom, compassion and clarity, engagement and transcendence, it is a journey that ultimately does not take us away from our humanity toward some purely spiritual realm, nor limit us only to human concerns, but invites us into a fuller humanity that is in itself an expression of the sacred.
What if I told you that the two words, judge not, hold the complete secret to spiritual transformation? Not as a moral rule to follow, but as a mystical key that unlocks healing, abundance, and inner peace. Joel Goldsmith discovered this wasn't about being nice or tolerant. It was about understanding the very nature of God's universe and how we block divine flow through judgment. Most people think judging means criticizing others harshly. But Joel revealed something far deeper. Every time you label anything as good or bad, sick or healthy, rich or poor, you're actually separating yourself from spiritual reality. You're placing your human opinion above divine truth. And in that moment, you close the door to miracles. The mystical secret is this: judgment creates the very conditions you're judging. When you see someone as sick, you reinforce sickness in consciousness. When you see lack, you perpetuate lack. Joel taught that spiritual vision means looking through appearances to the divine reality behind everything. This isn't positive thinking. It's recognizing what already exists in God's perfect creation. Joel Goldsmith spent decades practicing this principle in his healing work. He would sit with people suffering terrible diseases, financial ruin, or emotional torment. But he trained himself never to accept the appearance as reality. He wouldn't see the person as sick or poor or troubled. Instead, he recognized only their spiritual perfection. This takes tremendous spiritual discipline. Your human mind wants to immediately judge and categorize everything. Someone looks ill, so you think they're sick. Someone acts angry, so you label them as a difficult person. But Joel discovered that every judgment you make actually gives power to the illusion rather than the truth. Here's what makes this transformational. When you stop judging, you stop creating. You stop reinforcing the human condition with your consciousness. Instead, you become a clear channel for divine reality to express itself. The healing isn't something you do. It happens naturally when you remove your judgmental thinking from the equation. Let me show you how this works practically. Imagine someone close to you seems depressed and struggling. Your natural human response is to see them as depressed, worry about them, perhaps try to fix them. But every thought that accepts their depression as real actually reinforces it in the invisible realm of consciousness. Joel's approach was radically different. He would recognize that God knows nothing of depression. In divine consciousness, this person is already perfect, whole, and filled with life. The appearance of depression is just that, an appearance, not ultimate reality. By refusing to judge it as real, you stop feeding it with your consciousness. This doesn't mean ignoring practical help or being uncompassionate. It means you help from a foundation of spiritual truth rather than acceptance of the problem as real. You see past the appearance to what's eternally true. And mysteriously, when one person holds this unjudging consciousness, it often precipitates healing in another. The reason this works goes to the heart of mystical Christianity. Joel understood that there's only one consciousness, one mind, which is God's mind. When you judge, you're operating from the illusion of separation, as if your human opinion matters more than divine reality. But when you release judgment, you align with the one consciousness. Think about Jesus saying, "Judge not," alongside his healings. He never accepted disease or lack as real. He saw through appearances to spiritual truth. When he said the blind man could see or the lame could walk, he wasn't changing reality. He was recognizing what was already true in God's perfect creation, and that recognition became visible. This is your power too. Not through trying hard or having great faith, but through the simple practice of withdrawing your judgmental consciousness from appearances. Every time you catch yourself judging anything or anyone, pause and ask what God knows about this. In that pause, transformation begins. Let me share what happened with a student named Andrew who applied this principle to his failing business. For months he'd been judging his situation constantly. Not enough customers, too much debt, competitors doing better. Each judgment felt true based on appearances, But each judgment also locked those conditions in place through his consciousness. When Andrew learned Joel's teaching, he began a radical practice. Every time fear arose about his business, instead of judging it as failing, he would stop and recognize, God knows nothing of failure. In divine reality, infinite supply flows constantly. The appearance of lack is an ultimate truth. He practiced this dozens of times daily for weeks. The shift didn't happen overnight, which is important to understand. For about 3 weeks, nothing changed externally. But Andrew noticed his inner state transforming. Less anxiety, more peace, even when circumstances looked the same. He was training his consciousness to stop reinforcing the problem through judgment. Then, almost mysteriously, things began shifting. A former client returned unexpectedly. A new opportunity appeared from nowhere. Within 2 months, his business had completely turned around. Not because he tried harder, but because he stopped judging and blocking divine flow with his limited human opinions. Another powerful example comes from a woman named Sophia dealing with a painful relationship. Her adult son had become distant and angry, barely speaking to her for over a year. Every time she thought of him, judgment flooded her mind. He's being unfair, he's holding grudges, he needs to change, our relationship is broken. Joel would say that every one of those judgments, even though they felt justified, was actually maintaining the separation. Each time Sophia judged the relationship as broken, she gave power to brokenness. Each time she saw her son as angry, she reinforced anger in consciousness. The judgments felt like observations, but they were actually creative acts. Sophia began practicing non-judgment rigorously. When thoughts of her son arose, instead of rehearsing the problems, she would recognize, in God's reality, love is the only presence. This relationship exists in divine perfection right now, regardless of appearances. The separation I see isn't ultimate truth. She did this for months, even when it felt pointless. Gradually, something shifted in the invisible realm. Her son called unexpectedly one evening. The conversation was brief, but warm. Over the following months, connection slowly restored. Sophia realized the healing didn't come from changing him or fixing the relationship. It came from her withdrawing judgment and allowing divine reality to be revealed. Here's what makes this practice so challenging yet so powerful. Every appearance in your life will tempt you to judge. Someone cuts you off in traffic, your body shows symptoms, your bank account looks insufficient, someone criticizes you. In each moment, judgment feels completely appropriate and true. But Joel discovered that spiritual mastery means recognizing that all these appearances exist in the human realm of effect, not in the divine realm of cause. When you judge them as real and powerful, you're actually creating more of the same conditions. You're using your consciousness to reinforce illusion rather than truth. This is why Jesus could walk through violent crowds untouched, why Joel could sit with terminal illness and see healing. They had trained their consciousness not to accept appearances as reality. They looked at the human scene without judging it as powerful or real, and therefore it had no power to harm or limit them. You have this same capability. It's not about denying practical reality or pretending problems don't exist in the human experience. It's about knowing that behind every appearance, divine perfection is the only truth. And when you stop judging the appearance, you stop maintaining it with your consciousness. The transformation available through non-judgment is immediate and practical. Right now, you can look at any situation in your life that seems problematic. Instead of judging it as bad, lacking, sick, or wrong, pause and recognize what exists in God's consciousness. In divine reality, only perfection, wholeness, abundance, and harmony exist eternally. This practice will feel uncomfortable at first because your human mind is trained to judge everything constantly. You'll catch yourself judging dozens of times daily, but each time you notice and withdraw the judgment, you're opening a door for divine reality to flow through. You're removing your limited human consciousness from blocking miracles. Start with small things: traffic, weather, minor annoyances. Practice seeing them without judgment, recognizing that in God's universe, only perfection exists. As you develop this spiritual muscle with small situations, you'll find it becomes available for the larger challenges life presents. If this mystical key to transformation resonates with your soul, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's teachings, Subscribe for more profound spiritual wisdom, and comment. Which judgment are you ready to release today? Beyond the basic practice of non-judgment, Joel taught a complementary technique he called seeing with spiritual vision. This means training yourself to look at every person and situation and consciously recognize their divine nature first, before any human appearance registers. It's like developing new spiritual eyes. When you meet someone, your human senses immediately register age, appearance, mood, status. But spiritual vision means looking past all that to recognize this is God's perfect expression, right here, right now. The body I see is temporary, but the spiritual being is eternal and flawless. This isn't pretending or imagining. It's seeing what's actually true. Joel would practice this constantly throughout his day. Looking at people on the street, he would silently recognize their divine perfection. Hearing news of world problems, he would see past appearances to the spiritual truth underneath. This wasn't naive or escapist. It was the most practical thing he ever did, because it kept his consciousness clear and aligned with reality. Another powerful technique Joel taught was living in the secret place. This means maintaining an inner sanctuary of unjudging consciousness even while dealing with the outer world's demands. You might be handling business problems, family challenges, or health concerns in the human realm, but inwardly you remain in that place where no judgment exists. This secret place isn't a location but a state of consciousness. It's where you know that despite all appearances, God's perfect universe is the only reality. Problems may seem to exist in time and space, but in the eternal now of divine consciousness, only wholeness exists. You handle practical matters while anchored in spiritual truth. Joel described this as living in two worlds simultaneously. Your body moves through the human experience with its apparent problems and solutions, but your consciousness dwells in the realm where God's perfection is all that exists. The secret place protects you from being overwhelmed by appearances because you know they're not ultimate reality. Practice this by creating moments throughout your day where you consciously retreat into this inner sanctuary. Even 30 seconds of recognizing divine perfection behind all appearances will refresh your consciousness and prevent judgment from accumulating. Joel also taught what he called the practice of recognition. This is actively training your mind to recognize God's presence in everything before your human judgment can label it. Someone appears angry, and before you judge them as an angry person, you recognize God's peace is the only presence here. You feel physical discomfort, and before judging yourself as sick, you recognize God's perfection is my true nature. This recognition isn't affirmation or positive thinking. You're not trying to change anything or make something true. You're simply acknowledging what's already eternally true in divine consciousness. The practice is remembering rather than creating, recognizing rather than achieving. Start each morning with 5 minutes of recognition practice. Look at your day ahead and consciously recognize God's presence in every planned activity and interaction. This sets your consciousness in a non-judging state before you encounter situations that might tempt you to judge. The final complementary practice is what Joel called resting in is. Instead of thinking about how things should be or could be or will be, you rest in the eternal is of God's perfect presence. Right now, in this very moment, divine perfection is, not was, not will be, but is. Judgment always involves time. This was wrong, this should change, this will improve. But spiritual truth exists only in the eternal now. When you catch yourself judging any situation, shift immediately to is. What is true right now in God's consciousness? Perfection is, wholeness is, love is, supply is. You're not waiting for these to become true. You're recognizing they're true right now, regardless of appearances that suggest otherwise. This practice of resting in the eternal brings tremendous peace because you stop living in the mental torture of judging what was or what should be. You anchor in what eternally is, which never changes because it's divine reality itself. Practice this throughout your day. Pause, release judgment, and simply rest in the is of God's presence. Now let's address the challenges you'll face practicing non-judgment, because being realistic about obstacles is crucial for success. The first major challenge is that your mind has been judging automatically for decades. You've built powerful neural pathways that instantly categorize everything as good or bad, right or wrong. Breaking this pattern takes persistent effort. In your first weeks of practice, you might catch yourself judging and feel frustrated. I'm failing at non-judgment. I'm judging that I'm judging too much. This is completely normal. The key is not to judge your progress. Simply notice when judgment happens, release it without self-criticism, and gently return to spiritual vision. Progress is gradual. Expect to forget this practice completely for hours or even days at a time. Your habitual consciousness will reassert itself. When you realize you've been judging everything again, don't despair. Just begin again in that moment. Joel himself said spiritual practice is really about beginning again thousands of times. Another significant challenge is that other people will constantly invite you to judge with them. Someone complains about politics, and they expect you to agree with their judgments. Someone gossips about a mutual acquaintance, wanting you to join in judging that person. Social pressure to judge together is enormous in human relationships. Joel's advice was to maintain your non-judging consciousness silently without preaching to others or making them wrong for judging. You can listen compassionately without agreeing with judgments. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without confirming their negative assessments. You remain inwardly anchored in spiritual truth while being kind in human interaction. This takes social skill and wisdom. You're not announcing "I don't judge" in a superior way, which would itself be a judgment. You're simply maintaining your inner awareness that divine perfection is the truth behind whatever appearances are being discussed. Sometimes you might gently offer a more spiritual perspective, but often you simply hold the truth silently. Perhaps the hardest challenge is practicing non-judgment with your own body and circumstances. When you're experiencing pain, financial pressure, or relationship conflict, it feels completely unrealistic not to judge these as problems. Your human self screams that these are real issues requiring real solutions, and non-judgment seems like dangerous denial. Joel understood this deeply. He taught that you absolutely handle practical matters in the human realm. See doctors, pay bills, have necessary conversations, but while doing so, maintain your inner knowing that these appearances aren't ultimate reality. You can take human action from a consciousness that doesn't accept the problem as permanently real. This is the middle path, neither denying practical needs nor accepting appearances as spiritual truth. You might take medicine while knowing that in God's reality, perfect health is already established. You might look for employment while recognizing that infinite supply is your true nature. The human action and spiritual knowing coexist without contradiction. The breakthrough comes when you realize that non-judgment isn't about perfecting your thoughts, but about catching yourself sooner when judgment happens. At first, you might judge for hours before noticing. Then you catch yourself after minutes. Eventually, you notice judgment arising and can release it immediately. This progressive awareness is the real transformation. Joel emphasized that even catching yourself judging 3 times a day instead of being lost in judgment constantly represents tremendous spiritual progress. You're developing a witness consciousness that can observe your judgmental thinking without being controlled by it. This witness is your spiritual self emerging. Be especially gentle with yourself around physical symptoms or financial concerns. These appearances have biological and social reality that makes them harder to see through. Start with easier things like traffic or weather. Build your non-judgment capacity, then gradually apply it to more challenging situations as your spiritual strength grows. If these challenge-breaking insights speak to your spiritual journey, like to support this transformative content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment. Which obstacle feels most real in your practice right now? Let's explore how non-judgment transforms daily life at advanced levels. Consider someone like Vincent, who had practiced Joel's teachings for several years. He'd reached a point where he could catch judgment quickly in most situations. Then he faced his deepest test. His wife received a serious medical diagnosis that doctors said was terminal. Everything in Vincent wanted to judge this as catastrophic, real, and terrifying. The medical evidence seemed overwhelming. But years of practice had built his capacity to see beyond appearances. He sat with his wife and silently practiced. In God's consciousness, only life exists. This appearance of disease isn't ultimate truth. I will not judge this as real and powerful. This didn't mean denying medical reality or refusing treatment. His wife received excellent care, but Vincent maintained his unjudging consciousness throughout, never accepting the diagnosis as the final word. He saw his wife as spiritually perfect regardless of physical symptoms. For 18 months he held this vision when fear threatened to overwhelm him. His wife's condition slowly stabilized, then gradually improved. Years later, she remains healthy and active, long past the time frame doctors predicted. Vincent knows the healing came not from denying medicine, but from refusing to empower the appearance through judgment. His consciousness remained a clear channel for divine reality to manifest. Another advanced application involves someone like Olivia, who extended non-judgment to world events and collective consciousness. She noticed how much of her mental and emotional energy was consumed judging news, politics, social problems. Every judgment drained her spiritual vitality and contributed to collective fear rather than collective healing. Olivia began practicing what Joel called holding the world in spiritual vision. When seeing troubling news, instead of immediately judging it as terrible and real, she would recognize, behind all appearances, God's harmony is the only truth. This doesn't mean the human suffering isn't happening in time and space, but it isn't the deepest reality. This practice transformed her from anxious and overwhelmed to peaceful and genuinely helpful. She could engage with world problems from a consciousness of solution rather than amplifying problems through judgment. She discovered that one person holding unjudging consciousness contributes more to healing than thousands judging and worrying. Joel taught that this is how consciousness actually works. It's not individual, but collective. When you judge, you add to collective judgment. When you see with spiritual vision, you add light to collective consciousness. Your inner work has outer effects far beyond what you can measure. Let's look at how non-judgment transforms work and creative expression. Someone like Benjamin, an artist, discovered that all creative blocks came from judgment. He would judge his work as not good enough, judge himself as lacking talent, judge the art world as unfair. Each judgment contracted his creative flow. When Benjamin applied Joel's principle, he stopped judging his creative process entirely. He would create without labeling results as good or bad, successful or failed. He recognized that creativity flows from divine consciousness, and his job was simply to be a clear channel, not a critic. Judgment interrupts flow. Non-judgment allows it. This doesn't mean Benjamin stopped discerning quality or improving his craft, but he separated practical refinement from judgmental thinking. He could see that a piece needed more work without judging himself or the work as inadequate. The shift was subtle but transformative, from judgment that contracts to awareness that expands. His artistic output increased dramatically, and paradoxically, the quality improved precisely because he stopped judging quality. When you're not blocking creative flow with judgment, your natural gifts express more fully. This applies to any work. When you stop judging yourself and your performance, you actually perform better because consciousness flows freely. The most advanced application of non-judgment is what Joel called living in the fourth dimension. This means your consciousness dwells permanently in spiritual reality while your body functions in the three-dimensional world. You literally see two universes simultaneously, the appearing world of effects and the true world of divine cause. Someone living in this consciousness, like Joel in his later years, moves through daily life without judging anything as ultimately real except God's perfection. Challenges arise in the human experience, but they're handled from a consciousness that knows their temporary appearances, not permanent reality. This brings a peace that truly passes human understanding. This isn't achieved through effort, but through years of practice that gradually shift where your consciousness habitually dwells. You're not trying to live in the fourth dimension. You're removing the judgments that keep you locked in three-dimensional awareness. It's subtractive, not additive, releasing what blocks rather than acquiring something new. Joel described this as dying daily to the judgmental human self, so that your spiritual self, which never judges because it sees only truth, becomes your primary identity. This is the ultimate transformation available through the simple practice of judge not. It reveals your true nature as spiritual consciousness itself. Now we arrive at the total transformation that judge not brings when practiced consistently. You begin to live from what Joel called the infinite invisible, where your security comes not from visible circumstances but from invisible spiritual reality. Nothing in the appearing world can threaten you because you've stopped judging it as powerful. This doesn't mean you're detached or cold. Actually, you become more compassionate because you see people's struggles without judging them as victims of circumstances. You can help practically while knowing spiritually that their true nature is already perfect. This combination of human kindness and spiritual vision is what Joel called living the mystical life. Your entire relationship with life transforms. You're no longer constantly judging whether things are going well or poorly, whether you're succeeding or failing. You rest in the knowing that behind all appearances, divine perfection is unfolding exactly as it should. This brings profound peace even when the human experience includes challenges. The transformation extends to how you view your purpose and contribution. When you stop judging yourself and others, you naturally become a healing presence wherever you go. Your consciousness, clear of judgment, becomes a light that others feel even if they don't understand it. You don't have to do anything special. Your being itself becomes transformative. Joel lived this way in his later years. People would sit with him and feel their problems dissolve, not because he gave advice or tried to fix anything, but because his unjudging consciousness created a space where spiritual reality could be experienced. He proved that one person living in non-judgment does more good than thousands trying to improve the world from a judging consciousness. This can be your life too. Every moment you practice non-judgment, you're not just changing yourself. You're contributing to a shift in collective consciousness. You're demonstrating that there's another way to live, beyond the constant human habit of judging everything and everyone. You become what the world needs most, a clear space where divine reality can shine through. In practical terms, after months or years of practice, you'll notice you simply don't judge automatically anymore. Where once you had instant opinions about everything, now there's space. Where once you worried constantly, now there's an underlying peace. Where once you felt victimized by circumstances, now you know that your spiritual reality is untouchable by appearances. This doesn't mean you've perfected the practice. Even Joel said he had to begin again daily, catching himself when judgment arose. But the center of gravity in your consciousness shifts. You spend more time in spiritual awareness than in judgmental thinking. That shift is the transformation, gradual and genuine. Your relationships heal because you stop judging the people in your life as having problems they need to fix. Your health improves because you stop reinforcing symptoms through judgmental thinking. Your finances stabilize because you stop judging lack as real. Everything shifts not because you made it happen, but because you stopped blocking divine flow with judgment. The final truth Joel Goldsmith offers is this: judge not is the complete path. You don't need anything else. These two words, properly understood and practiced, will take you from human consciousness to spiritual consciousness, from suffering to peace, from seeking to finding. The entire mystical life is contained in releasing judgment. Every spiritual teacher in history has pointed to this same truth in different words. Jesus said, "Judge not." Buddha taught non-attachment to views. Krishna spoke of seeing the self in all beings. They all recognize that judgment is what separates us from experiencing divine reality that's already present. Your practice from this moment forward is simple. Notice when you judge anything or anyone. Pause. Recognize that in God's consciousness, only perfection exists. Release the judgment. Return to spiritual vision. Do this 10,000 times, and you'll find you've been transformed without trying to transform. You've simply removed what blocked your awareness of what you always were. Spiritual consciousness itself, infinite and free. If your spiritual understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video to share this transformation, subscribe for more mystical teachings that actually work, and comment, "I am transformed," to affirm your commitment to living without judgment. For centuries, this biblical phrase has been misunderstood, creating separation and spiritual elitism. Joel Goldsmith revealed something revolutionary. Being chosen is not about divine favoritism. It's about your willingness to awaken to a truth that's already present within you. The calling comes to everyone, but few choose to answer it with their whole being. The shocking truth is this: you are not waiting to be chosen by God. God is waiting for you to choose the path of spiritual consciousness. This isn't about worthiness or special selection. It's about your decision to move beyond the world of effects and enter the realm of cause. Every person receives the same divine invitation, but most remain distracted by external seeking. What makes someone chosen is their commitment to inner work, to silence, to practicing the presence of God moment by moment. Joel taught that this selection happens through your own spiritual dedication. When you turn within consistently, you discover you were never separate from the divine. The choice has always been yours to make, and today you can make it. Most people pray for God to change their circumstances, to fix their problems, to deliver miracles from outside themselves. This is why they remain among the many called, but never experience true transformation. Joel discovered that authentic spiritual power flows differently. It comes through realization, not through begging or pleading with an external deity to intervene. The chosen ones understand a mystical secret. God is not a person who decides your fate. God is the consciousness you embody when you awaken to your true spiritual nature. This means your healing, your abundance, your peace are not coming from somewhere else. They emerge from within as you align with infinite consciousness. This shift changes everything about how you approach life. When you stop seeking God's favor and start realizing God's presence as your own consciousness, you become one of the few who are chosen, not by divine whim, but by spiritual maturity. Not by luck, but by understanding. Joel spent decades proving this truth through countless healings that occurred when people shifted from petition to realization. Here's what Joel taught that transforms everything. The kingdom of God is within you right now. Not tomorrow, not after you become more worthy, not when you pray harder. This present moment contains the fullness of divine presence. The chosen ones are simply those who stop postponing their spiritual inheritance and claim it through conscious awareness today. This requires a complete reversal of how you've been taught to approach spirituality. Instead of asking God for things, you rest in the awareness that God is already being itself as your very existence. Instead of trying to get somewhere spiritually, you recognize you are already there. The journey is not toward God, but as God expressing through your unique consciousness. Joel called this the practice of the presence. It means living each moment aware that divine consciousness is the only power, the only presence, the only reality. When this becomes your consistent state, not just an idea but your lived experience, you discover you are among the chosen. You chose yourself by choosing truth over illusion, presence over seeking. The technique Joel gave us is simple, but requires dedication. Several times each day, pause whatever you're doing. Close your eyes for just 60 seconds. Silently acknowledge, God is the only presence here, the only power operating. Don't ask for anything. Don't try to fix anything. Simply rest in this awareness. Let it saturate your consciousness like light filling a room. This is not meditation, not visualization, not affirmation. It's recognition of what is already true. In those 60 seconds, you're not becoming chosen, you're realizing you already are. The divine consciousness that created galaxies is the same consciousness reading these words through your eyes right now. There's no separation to overcome, only illusion to dissolve through consistent awareness. Practice this recognition throughout your day, before meetings, in traffic, while cooking, upon waking. Each time you do, you're strengthening your realization that you are not separate from the source. Within weeks, you'll notice circumstances shifting, not because God finally heard you, but because your consciousness changed. You became one of the few who chose to live from spiritual truth rather than material appearance. Let me share what happened to a woman named Margaret, who studied with Joel in the early 1950s. She had suffered from chronic pain for 7 years. Doctors found nothing wrong, yet the pain persisted daily. She prayed constantly, begged God for healing, attended every healing service available. Nothing changed. She felt abandoned by God, convinced she wasn't worthy of being chosen for healing. Then Margaret attended one of Joel's classes where he explained this principle. She realized she'd been approaching everything backward. She wasn't unchosen by God. She was choosing limitation by seeking healing from outside herself. That night, instead of praying for healing, She sat in silence for 20 minutes, simply acknowledging divine presence as the only reality. No asking, no pleading, just recognition. Within 3 days, the pain began subsiding. Within 2 weeks, it was completely gone. But here's what matters most. Margaret didn't just receive physical healing. She discovered her spiritual identity. She realized she had always been whole in consciousness, and the pain was simply her belief in separation made manifest. She became one of the chosen by choosing to see through spiritual eyes rather than material perception. Another student, Thomas, was facing bankruptcy in his business. He had 48 hours before losing everything he'd built over 15 years. He came to Joel desperate, wanting a miracle, wanting God to intervene and save his company. Joel told him something that seemed cruel at first. Your problem is not your business. Your problem is that you believe you have a problem. Thomas was angry initially. How could Joel dismiss his very real crisis? But Joel explained, in divine consciousness, there is no lack, no loss, no failure. These exist only in the material sense of life. If Thomas would stop trying to fix the problem and instead recognize the presence of infinite supply as his true consciousness, the solution would appear naturally through that awareness. Thomas spent those 48 hours not working on business plans, but sitting in silence, recognizing supply as a spiritual reality already present. On the final day, a former client he hadn't heard from in years called with an opportunity that not only saved his business but expanded it significantly. Thomas learned that being chosen means choosing to see reality from consciousness rather than from circumstance. This shift took him from panic to peace to prosperity. A third example shows how this principle works in relationships. Sarah had been praying for her husband to change for 12 years. She attended church regularly, did affirmations, visualized their marriage improving. Yet their relationship grew colder each year. She believed God wasn't answering her prayers, that perhaps she wasn't among those chosen to have a happy marriage. When Sarah encountered Joel's teaching, everything shifted. She stopped praying for her husband to change. She stopped seeing him as the problem. Instead, she began practicing the presence of love as a spiritual reality, not dependent on his behavior or her feelings. She would sit quietly several times daily, recognizing that divine love was the only presence in her consciousness, in her home, in her marriage. Something remarkable happened over the next 3 months. As Sarah's consciousness changed, her husband naturally responded differently. Without any words about spirituality or any pressure to change, he became more attentive, more affectionate, more present. The marriage transformed because Sarah stopped seeking change from outside and instead embodied the love she wanted to experience. She chose to be chosen by living from spiritual truth rather than material appearance. These 3 stories reveal the pattern Joel discovered in thousands of cases. Physical healing, financial restoration, relationship transformation, all emerge from the same principle. When you stop seeking God's intervention and start recognizing God's presence as your own consciousness, you move from the many called to the few chosen. Not because God changed, but because you did. The critical shift is from petition to recognition, from seeking to realizing, from trying to become to acknowledging what already is. This doesn't happen through positive thinking or mental tricks. It requires genuine spiritual perception, seeing beyond the material appearance to the divine reality underneath. Joel proved repeatedly that this shift in consciousness produces tangible results in the visible world. Each of these people spent weeks, not days, developing this awareness. Margaret practiced 20 minutes daily for 2 weeks. Thomas spent 48 hours in concentrated recognition. Sarah dedicated 3 months to consistent inner work. The chosen ones are those willing to invest time in consciousness rather than demanding instant external changes. They understand that spiritual realization precedes material demonstration. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore your own spiritual choosing, like this video to help others discover these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which story resonated most deeply with your current journey. Beyond the basic practice, Joel taught a complementary technique he called the beholder. This means you step back from your thoughts, feelings, and circumstances and simply observe them without judgment or resistance. You become the witness of your experience rather than being identified with it. From this place of detached awareness, you recognize that the real you is the consciousness beholding, not the conditions being beheld. When anxiety arises, instead of fighting it or being consumed by it, you become the beholder. You observe, there is anxiety appearing in consciousness. You don't claim it as yours. You don't battle it. You simply watch it from the position of pure awareness. This subtle shift removes the power from the emotion because you're no longer feeding it with identification. You're recognizing yourself as the consciousness in which experiences arise and fall. Practice this throughout your day. When frustration appears, behold it. When worry surfaces, behold it. When physical discomfort manifests, behold it. Each time you do, you're strengthening your identity as consciousness itself rather than as the victim of circumstances. This is another dimension of being chosen. You choose to identify with the eternal witness rather than with temporary conditions. Joel also taught what he called the secret of the locked door. This refers to the practice of closing your door, literally and figuratively, to commune with the Father within. In our modern world of constant connectivity and endless distractions, this practice becomes even more critical. The chosen ones are those willing to disconnect from the world regularly to reconnect with source consciousness. This doesn't mean long hours of meditation. Joel recommended multiple short periods of inner communion throughout the day. 5 minutes in the morning, 3 minutes at lunch, 5 minutes in the evening. During these periods, you're not thinking about your problems or making mental lists. You're resting in the awareness of presence, allowing divine consciousness to fill your being without agenda or effort. The locked door represents your willingness to shut out the world's claims, opinions, and demands temporarily. In that sacred space, you're not trying to get anything from God. You're not even trying to be spiritual. You're simply being aware that in this moment, consciousness is all that exists. This regular practice builds a foundation of inner peace that circumstances cannot shake. Another powerful technique Joel shared is releasing the pairs of opposites. Most people live trapped between good and bad, health and sickness, abundance and lack, success and failure. They pray for the good and fight against the bad, but Joel revealed that both sides of every pair exist only in the material sense of life. In spiritual consciousness, there are no opposites, only the infinite presence of God being itself. When you find yourself hoping for good to come or fearing that bad will happen, stop. Recognize that both are mental concepts, not spiritual reality. Health is not the opposite of sickness in consciousness. Health is the recognition that wholeness is the only truth. Abundance is not the opposite of lack. Abundance is the awareness that infinite supply is the nature of divine expression. You're not choosing one over the other. You're seeing beyond both. This practice requires vigilance because the world constantly reinforces duality. Every news report, every conversation, every advertisement tries to convince you that opposites are real and you must choose sides. The chosen ones are those who refuse this trap. They see through the appearance of opposites to the underlying unity of spiritual reality. This vision liberates them from the endless battle between positive and negative. Joel taught one more essential practice: living by grace. This means recognizing that your good does not come through your efforts, your worthiness, your hard work, or your clever strategies. Your good flows naturally from consciousness itself when you stop blocking it with beliefs in limitation. Grace is not something God gives to favorites. Grace is the natural overflow of spiritual awareness, unobstructed by material beliefs. To live by grace, you must release the belief that you must earn, deserve, or work for your spiritual inheritance. This doesn't mean you become passive or lazy in the world. It means you stop believing that your actions create your good. Your actions express your consciousness, but consciousness itself is the source. When you align with this truth, right action flows naturally and effortlessly. Practice this by noticing when you're straining, forcing, or manipulating to make things happen. In those moments, stop and breathe. Recognize that infinite intelligence is already operating, already arranging, already providing. Your job is not to make it happen, but to allow it to happen through your awareness and cooperation. This is how the chosen ones live. resting in grace while remaining actively engaged in life. Now let's address what happens when you practice these principles and nothing seems to change. This is where most people give up and conclude they're not among the chosen. But Joel warned about this crucial period he called the testing time. When you first shift to spiritual consciousness, your old mental patterns don't immediately disappear. They rise up stronger, trying to convince you that this approach doesn't work. During this testing time, appearances may actually seem to worsen. Physical symptoms might intensify, financial pressure might increase, relationships might become more strained. This is not evidence that the principle is false. It's evidence that you're challenging deeply rooted beliefs and they're fighting back. The material sense of life resists spiritual awareness because they cannot coexist in the same consciousness simultaneously. Joel advised students to persist through this period without wavering. Don't judge the truth by temporary appearances. If you've been believing in limitation for 30 years, that belief structure won't dissolve after 3 days of practice. It requires consistent, patient recognition of spiritual truth despite what your eyes show you. The chosen ones are simply those who refuse to quit during the testing time. Another common challenge is what Joel called taking on the world's beliefs. Even as you practice spiritual consciousness, you live in a world that bombards you with messages of fear, lack, sickness, and limitation. Every news broadcast, every casual conversation, every advertisement reinforces material beliefs. If you're not vigilant, you'll unconsciously absorb these beliefs and wonder why your practice isn't working. The solution is developing what Joel called spiritual immunity. Just as your body can become immune to certain diseases, your consciousness can become immune to the world's limiting beliefs. This happens through consistent recognition that only God is power. When you hear about economic crisis, you don't fight it or fear it. You simply recognize that has no power in spiritual consciousness. When someone tells you about their illness, you feel compassion but don't accept disease as reality in God. This doesn't mean you become cold or unfeeling. It means you refuse to give power to appearance. You train yourself to see through material claims to the spiritual truth underneath. This takes practice and can feel awkward at first. But over time, you develop a consciousness that remains undisturbed by the world's chaos, not through denial but through realization. A third challenge many face is impatience with the process. You want healing now, abundance now, peace now. When it doesn't manifest on your timeline, you doubt everything. Joel addressed this by explaining that spiritual demonstration operates on consciousness time, not clock time. A shift in consciousness might manifest instantly or might take months to appear in visible form, depending on how deeply rooted the limiting belief is. He used the example of pregnancy. From conception to birth takes 9 months. You cannot rush it or force it. Spiritual realization works similarly. The moment you truly realize a spiritual truth, conception has occurred. But the gestation period varies. Some demonstrations are born quickly, others need time to develop. Your impatience doesn't help. Your trust and continued recognition do. The chosen ones learn to live in the now, satisfied with the consciousness itself rather than desperate for the demonstration. They know that consciousness is cause and manifestation is effect. When the cause is established, the effect must follow. Their peace comes from knowing they're living in spiritual truth, whether or not the visible world has caught up yet. This patience is actually power, not passivity. The final major obstacle is spiritual pride. Ironically, as you begin experiencing results from these principles, ego can creep in. You start thinking you're more chosen than others, more advanced, more spiritual. This subtle arrogance actually blocks further progress because it reintroduces separation. You've simply created a new form of material identity, a spiritual ego that believes it's special. Joel warned strongly against this trap. The moment you think you're chosen because of your spiritual attainment, you've missed the entire point. No one is more chosen than anyone else. Everyone has equal access to divine consciousness. The only difference is who has recognized it and who hasn't yet. And that recognition isn't a trophy you earned. It's a gift you received by being willing to look within. Stay humble in your practice. When healing occurs, don't credit yourself. When abundance flows, don't think you manifested it through your power. Recognize that consciousness itself is the healer, the supplier, the transformer. You're simply the transparency through which it operates. This humility keeps the channel open. Pride clogs it. The truly chosen are those who know they're nothing in themselves and everything in God. If these challenge-breaking techniques resonate with your spiritual journey, like to support this transformative content, subscribe for advanced consciousness practices, and comment which obstacle you're most ready to overcome right now. Let's explore how this principle operates in advanced daily situations. Consider the workplace where you face difficult colleagues or demanding bosses. Most people pray for God to change the other person or remove them from the situation. But Joel taught that every person in your experience is appearing in your consciousness, which means they're there to reveal something about your own state of awareness. When a difficult coworker appears, instead of resenting them, use this technique. Recognize that divine consciousness is the only presence where that person is. Don't try to change their behavior. Don't mentally argue with them. Simply see through their human appearance to the spiritual reality underlying it. As you consistently hold this awareness, one of two things happens. Either they change naturally, or they exit your experience entirely. A man named Robert practiced this with a boss who made his life miserable for 2 years. Instead of quitting or fighting, Robert spent 3 months seeing his boss as spiritual consciousness, rather than as a tyrant. He never spoke about this to anyone, or tried to manipulate the situation. Within 4 months, the boss was transferred to another division. Robert learned that being chosen means choosing to see everyone through spiritual eyes, even those who challenge you most. In family relationships, this principle becomes even more profound. Your spouse, your children, your parents often trigger your deepest wounds and strongest reactions. Most people try to fix their family members or wish they were different. But Joel revealed that your family members are your greatest spiritual teachers, showing you exactly where your consciousness still holds limitation. A woman named Diana used this with her teenage son who was rebellious and failing in school. She stopped nagging, stopped threatening, stopped trying to control him. Instead, every time she thought about him or saw him, she practiced recognizing the Christ consciousness as his true identity. She didn't tell him what she was doing. She simply held this awareness consistently, sometimes dozens of times per day. Over 6 months, her son transformed. Not because she manipulated him through spiritual techniques, but because her consciousness changed. As she stopped seeing him as a problem and started recognizing his spiritual wholeness, he naturally responded from that higher level. His grades improved, his attitude shifted, their relationship healed. Diana became chosen by choosing to see her son as God sees him, despite all evidence to the contrary. Financial challenges provide another arena for advanced practice. When bills pile up and money seems scarce, panic is the natural human response. But Joel taught that the chosen ones respond differently. They recognize that supply is spiritual, not material. Money is simply a symbol of the infinite abundance that already exists in consciousness. When you realize this, supply flows through unexpected channels. A businessman named Frank faced this when his income suddenly dropped by 60%. He could have panicked, cut everything, scrambled desperately. Instead, he practiced recognizing infinite supply as his consciousness for 30 minutes each morning and evening. He didn't visualize money or affirm abundance. He simply rested in the awareness that consciousness itself is full, complete, lacking nothing. Within 8 weeks, 3 new income streams appeared from completely unexpected sources. He didn't hustle more or work harder. He aligned his consciousness with spiritual abundance, and form followed. Frank learned that being chosen in the financial realm means refusing to accept material appearance as reality, and instead recognizing supply as an infinite spiritual truth always available to consciousness that realizes it. Health challenges in chronic or serious conditions require this advanced understanding. When doctors give dire diagnoses, or when pain persists despite all efforts, spiritual consciousness becomes your only true resource. Joel healed himself of tuberculosis through this principle decades before he taught others. He realized that disease exists only in the belief that life is material and vulnerable. In spiritual consciousness, wholeness is the only truth. A woman named Catherine was diagnosed with a condition doctors said was incurable and progressive. She was given medications that made her feel worse. After studying Joel's work, she made a radical decision. She would spend 1 year practicing spiritual consciousness before accepting the medical verdict as final. Every morning and evening, she sat recognizing the truth. God is the only life, the only presence, the only power. Disease has no existence in that reality. It took 11 months, but her symptoms gradually disappeared. When she returned to her doctors, they found no trace of the condition. They called it spontaneous remission, a medical mystery. But Catherine knew. Consciousness changed, and form followed. She became chosen not through special divine favor, but through choosing to identify with spiritual wholeness rather than material diagnosis. This is the ultimate demonstration of this principle in action. As we move toward completion, understand that living as one of the chosen becomes your natural state, not something you strain to achieve. After weeks and months of practice, recognizing spiritual consciousness becomes automatic. You stop trying to be spiritual and simply are. This is what Joel called dying daily to the material sense of life and being reborn into spiritual awareness. Your days transform when this becomes established. You wake already aware of divine presence. You move through challenges without losing your center. You encounter difficulties but aren't defined by them. You see through appearances to reality. You live from the inside out, rather than letting outside circumstances determine your inner state. This is true freedom, the liberation that comes from choosing to be chosen. This doesn't mean you become perfect or never have human moments. It means you have a foundation that holds steady beneath the changing surface of life. When you forget and get caught in material thinking, you notice quickly and return to truth. When appearances scream limitation, you remember what's real. You become unmoved by the world's drama because you're anchored in something that doesn't change. The chosen life is marked by several characteristics Joel observed in mature students. First, a deep inner peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. Second, a naturalness about spiritual things, without the need to prove or defend or convince. Third, an ability to be in the world fully engaged, yet not controlled by it. Fourth, a quiet joy that bubbles up from within rather than being triggered by external events. These aren't things you try to develop. They're the natural fruit of consistent spiritual realization. As you practice recognizing divine consciousness as the only power and presence, these qualities emerge organically. You don't work on becoming peaceful. Peace reveals itself as your true nature when anxiety is seen as the illusion it is. You don't cultivate joy. Joy flows naturally when you stop looking to conditions for happiness. Other people begin noticing something different about you, though they might not be able to name what it is. You carry a presence that affects those around you without trying. Your consciousness of truth becomes a silent blessing to everyone you encounter. This is the real meaning of being chosen. You become a transparency through which divine consciousness operates in the world, blessing without effort, healing without intention, transforming simply by being. As you continue this path, you'll discover layers you didn't know existed. Just when you think you understand, a deeper revelation comes. This is natural and beautiful. Spiritual awakening isn't a single event, but an ongoing unfoldment. Each day brings opportunity to see more clearly, realize more deeply, embody more fully. The chosen ones are those who embrace this endless journey with patience and wonder. Joel taught thousands of students over decades, and he observed this pattern repeatedly. Those who persisted through the testing time, who practiced daily despite appearances, who remained humble yet committed, these were the ones who experienced sustained transformation, not because they were special, but because they chose consistently. They chose truth over appearance, consciousness over condition, spiritual reality over material sense. You stand at this same choice point right now. Everything you need is already within you. Divine consciousness is not separate from your awareness in this moment. The kingdom is at hand, not tomorrow. All the peace, all the abundance, all the healing, all the wisdom you seek is present right now in consciousness. The question is not whether you'll be chosen. The question is whether you'll choose to recognize what already is. So here is your invitation, not from me, but from truth itself. Begin today. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions improve. not when you feel more ready. Today, pause and recognize divine presence as your own consciousness. Do this not once, but many times throughout your day. Let it become as natural as breathing. Watch what happens over weeks and months as this recognition deepens and stabilizes. Remember, you're not trying to become chosen. You're realizing you already are. Every person who has ever walked this earth has the same divine consciousness at their core. The only difference between the many called and the few chosen is the choice to recognize this truth and live from it consistently. That choice is available to you right now, in this moment, as you hear these words. Joel Goldsmith spent his life proving that spiritual consciousness heals, transforms, and liberates. He left these teachings not as theory, but as practical tools anyone can use. The results speak through thousands of transformed lives across decades. Now it's your turn. Choose to be chosen, not through arrogance or spiritual pride, but through humble recognition that God is the only presence where you are. From this realization, everything else flows naturally. If your understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith revelations, like this video to help others discover this truth, subscribe for more transformative spiritual teachings, and comment, "I choose to be chosen," to declare your commitment to this path of consciousness.
Вы когда-нибудь испытывали чувство, когда кто-то ранит вас так глубоко, что кажется, будто весь ваш мир перевернулся? Это тяжелое давление в груди, бесконечные повторы их слов или поступков в вашей голове, бессонные ночи, когда вы думаете, почему они так поступили. Я была там. Мы все были там. И сегодня я хочу поделиться с вами чем-то мощным. Тем, что изменило мою жизнь и может изменить вашу. Прежде чем мы начнем, я хочу, чтобы вы сделали глубокий вдох вместе со мной. Просто один глубокий, осознанный вдох. Почувствуйте, как воздух наполняет ваши легкие. Почувствуйте, как ваши плечи расслабляются. Потому что то, что я собираюсь вам рассказать, это не просто набор быстрых решений или временных мер. Это о глубинной трансформации. Это о том, как вернуть свою силу у тех, кто вас ранил. Каждый день я получаю сообщения от людей со всего мира, которые делятся своими историями предательства, разочарования и heartbreak. Историями, которые могут вызвать слезы на глазах. Историями, которые могут отражать ваш собственный опыт. И знаете, что меня больше всего fascinates? Это не сама боль. Это то, как эта боль формирует нас. Но вот истина, которая изменила все для меня. Люди, которые ранят нас, не держат ключ к нашему исцелению. Мы держим его. И сегодня я покажу вам, как использовать этот ключ. Подумайте об этом на мгновение. Что, если я скажу вам, что то, как вы сейчас справляетесь с людьми, которые вас ранят, может на самом деле удерживать вас в цикле боли? Что, если я скажу вам, что все, что вы думали, что знаете о том, как справляться с эмоциональной болью, на самом деле работает против вас? Я помню, как однажды утром стояла на кухне. Руки дрожат, когда я держала чашку с кофе, а в голове крутились мысли о человеке, который глубоко предал мое доверие. Гнев, обида, боль – это все поглощало меня. И в тот момент я осознала нечто важное. Я позволяла им жить в моей голове бесплатно. Они ранили меня один раз, но я снова и снова причиняла себе боль тем. То утро стало поворотным моментом в моей жизни, и сегодня может стать таким же для вас. Методы, которыми я собираюсь с вами поделиться, это не просто теоретические концепции, о которых я читала в книгах. Это проверенные стратегии, которые я не только сама использовала, но и видела, как они изменили жизни тысяч людей, с которыми я работала. Людей, таких как вы, которые устали позволять прошлым ранам определять их настоящее и определять их будущее. Теперь, прежде чем мы перейдем к 5 мощным способам справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, я хочу, чтобы вы поняли нечто важное. Это не о том, чтобы забыть, что произошло. Это не о том, чтобы притворяться, что боли не существует. И это определенно не о том, чтобы прощать людей за их действия. Это о чем-то гораздо более мощном. Это о том, чтобы вернуть свою эмоциональную свободу. Когда кто-то ранит нас, они создают историю в нашем сознании. Историю о нашей ценности, о доверии, о взаимоотношениях, о самой жизни. Но вот в чем дело. Хотя мы не можем контролировать ту главу, которую они написали в нашей жизни, Мы имеем абсолютный контроль над тем, как мы пишем остальную часть нашей истории. Позвольте мне нарисовать вам картину. Представьте, что вы держите в руке раскаленный уголь. Он обжигает вас, причиняя сильную боль. Человек, который вас ранил, возможно, положил этот уголь туда. Но кто сейчас его держит? Кто позволяет ему продолжать жечь? Верно, это мы. И сегодня мы научимся отпускать этот уголь не ради них, а ради нашего собственного спокойствия и силы. Первый способ справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, я называю методом зеркала. Это может вас удивить, потому что это, вероятно, противоположно тому, что вы делали до сих пор. Когда кто-то ранит нас, наша естественная реакция – сосредоточить всю нашу энергию на них, и в действиях, их словах, их мотивах. Мы становимся эмоциональными детективами, анализируя каждую деталь того, что они сделали. Но вот где начинается трансформация. Вместо того, чтобы сосредоточиться на них, направьте это мощное внимание внутрь. Это не о том, чтобы винить себя, совсем наоборот. Это о том, чтобы понять свою реакцию на боль. Потому что хотя мы не можем контролировать действия других, мы имеем абсолютный контроль над нашей реакцией на эти действия. Позвольте мне поделиться личным опытом, который это прекрасно иллюстрирует. В свое время я пережила разрушительное предательство в своей профессиональной жизни. Человек, которому я полностью доверяла, действовал за моей спиной и пытался разрушить все, что я построила. В течение нескольких месяцев я была поглощена гневом и мыслями о мести. Я просыпалась, думая о них, и засыпала, думая о них. Они стали главными героями моей жизни, а я лишь второстепенным персонажем. И вот однажды я поймала свое отражение в зеркале и едва узнала себя. Человек, смотрящий на меня, не был тем уверенным, страстным человеком, которым я знала себя. Тогда я поняла, что, сосредоточив всю свою энергию на них, я позволяла им побеждать дважды. Они ранили меня один раз, но я причиняла себе боль каждый день, позволяя им доминировать в моих мыслях и эмоциях. Метод зеркала включает в себя задавание себе 3 мощных вопросов каждый раз, когда вы чувствуете, что вас поглощают мысли о человеке, который вас ранил. Во-первых, что я чувствую прямо сейчас? Не то, что вы думаете о ситуации, а то, что вы на самом деле чувствуете в своем теле. Во-вторых, что это вызывает во мне? И в-третьих, что мне нужно, чтобы чувствовать себя в безопасности и целостности, независимо от их действий? Эти вопросы смещают ваш фокус с внешнего, что вы не можете контролировать, на внутреннее, где находится ваша истинная сила. Это как включить свет в темной комнате. Вдруг вы видите вещи, которые раньше не могли разглядеть. Но вот где большинство людей застревает. Они думают, что признание своих эмоций и потребностей как-то ничто не может быть дальше от истины. Это не о них, это о вашей эмоциональной свободе. Это о том, чтобы вернуть свою силу. Позвольте мне привести вам практический пример того, как это работает. Допустим, кто-то на работе присвоил ваши идеи и получил повышение, которое вы заслуживали. Естественная реакция – сосредоточиться на их нечестности, их манипуляциях, их успехе за ваш счет. Но с помощью метода зеркала вы бы обратились внутрь. Что вы чувствуете? Возможно, это не только гнев, но и страх за свое будущее в карьере или печаль по поводу несправедливости. Что это вызывает в вас? Может быть, это пробуждает старые чувства, что вас не видят или не ценят? Что вам нужно, чтобы чувствовать себя в безопасности и целостности? Это может привести вас к осознанию, что вам нужно установить более четкие границы, более ясно документировать свои достижения или даже искать возможности, где ваши таланты будут лучше признаны. Видите, как это переводит вас из роли жертвы обстоятельств в автора своей собственной истории? Это не о том, чтобы отрицать или минимизировать боль. Это о том, чтобы использовать ее как катализатор для вашего собственного роста и силы. Второй мощный способ справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, я называю подходом алхимика. Точно так же, как древние алхимики верили, что могут превратить свинец в золото, вы имеете силу преобразовать свою боль в силу. Это не просто позитивное мышление. Это о практических, действенных шагах, которые изменяют ваши отношения с самой болью. Подумайте об этом. Каждый раз, когда кто-то ранит вас, они невольно дарят вам подарок – возможность построить эмоциональную стойкость. Это как тренировка в спортзале. Тяжести, которые кажутся тяжелыми и причиняют временный дискомфорт, на самом деле делают вас сильнее. Ключ в том, чтобы научиться использовать вес эмоциональной боли для наращивания своих психологических мышц, а не позволять ей раздавить вас. Я помню, когда впервые открыла для себя этот подход. Я была на самом дне, чувствуя предательство и оставленность. Но затем я начала задавать себе другие вопросы. Вместо того, чтобы спрашивать, почему это произошло со мной, я начала спрашивать, чему это может меня научить. Вместо того, чтобы думать, как они могли так поступить, я спрашивала, как я могу использовать это, чтобы стать сильнее. Трансформация была замечательной. Каждое воспоминание о боли стало уроком о границах. Каждое предательство стало мастер-классом по развлечению. Каждое разочарование стало возможностью уточнить свои ценности и укрепить свою самооценку. Позвольте мне показать вам, как это работает на практике. Когда кто-то ранит вас, возьмите блокнот или откройте заметки на своем телефоне. Запишите боль. Не только то, что произошло, но и как это заставило вас чувствовать. Затем проведите линию по центру страницы. С одной стороны, перечислите все способы, которыми этот опыт вас испытал. С другой стороны, запишите потенциальные силы, которые вы могли бы развить из каждого испытания. Например, если кто-то предал ваше доверие, испытанием может быть работа с проблемами доверия. Соответствующей силой может стать развитие лучшего развлечения в отношениях, обучение доверию к своей интуиции или становление более независимым, оставаясь открытым для искренних связей. Это не о том, чтобы заставлять себя быть позитивным или притворяться, что боль не имеет значения. Это о том, чтобы отказаться позволять этой боли быть концом вашей истории. Это о том, чтобы сказать «да, это произошло со мной, но посмотрите, что я с этим сделаю». Третий способ справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, я называю рамкой свободы. Это, возможно, самый контринтуитивный подход, но он невероятно мощный. Он основан на простой истине, которую мне потребовалось годы, чтобы понять. Держаться за обиду – это как пить яд и ожидать, что другой человек умрет. Рамка свободы – это о том, чтобы освободить себя от тюрьмы обиды. Не ради них, а ради вашего собственного освобождения. Это не значит, что вам нужно примириться с человеком, который вас ранил, или даже иметь его в своей жизни. Это значит освободить себя от эмоциональных цепей, которые связывают вас с болью. Вот как это работает. Сначала вам нужно понять, что обида – это как контракт, который мы заключаем с болью. Мы держимся за нее, потому что на каком-то уровне мы верим, что она защищает нас или служит нам. Возможно, мы думаем, что это предотвратит новые раны. Возможно, мы считаем, что удержание гнева каким-то образом накажет другого человека. Или, возможно, мы чувствуем, что отпускание означает, что то, что они сделали, было нормально. Но вот в чем правда. Держаться за обиду – это как носить тяжелый рюкзак, наполненный камнями, куда бы вы ни шли. Человек, который вас ранил, давно уже ушел, в то время как вы все еще несете этот груз. Рамка свободы помогает вам положить этот рюкзак камень за камнем. Начните с определения того, что удержание этой боли стоит вам. Как это влияет на ваши текущие отношения, ваше здоровье, ваше душевное спокойствие, вашу способность доверять и связываться с другими. Будьте предельно честны с собой о цене, которую вы платите за удержание этой обиды. Затем создайте то, что я называю списком свободы. Запишите все вещи, которые вы могли бы делать, быть или испытывать, если бы не несли этот эмоциональный груз. Как бы вы себя чувствовали? Что бы вы делали по-другому? Какие возможности могли бы открыться для вас? Это не о том, чтобы заставлять себя прощать или притворяться, что все в порядке. Это о том, чтобы выбрать свою собственную свободу вместо ложного чувства контроля, которое дает нам обида. Это о том, чтобы признать, что лучшая месть – это не позволять действиям других определять ваше эмоциональное состояние. Я видела, как люди трансформируют свои жизни, используя эту рамку. Люди, которые застряли в обидах, которые тянулись десятилетиями, вдруг находят себя свободными, чтобы снова любить. Люди, которые построили стены вокруг своих сердец, открывают смелость быть уязвимыми снова. Люди, которые определяли себя через свою боль, становятся новыми версиями силы и стойкости. Четвертый способ справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, я называю революцией границ. Здесь мы переходим от внутренней работы к внешнему действию, но так, как это может вас удивить. Большинство людей думает, что границы – это о том, чтобы держать других подальше. Но эффективные границы на самом деле о том, чтобы сохранить себя целым. Подумайте о границах, как о стенах вашего дома. Они не существуют, чтобы наказывать людей или держать всех вдали. Они существуют, чтобы создать безопасное пространство, в котором вы можете процветать. Революция границ – это о том, чтобы научиться создавать и поддерживать здоровые границы, не строя крепостных стен вокруг своего сердца. Этот подход начинается с радикальной идеи. Люди, которые вас ранят, часто являются вашими величайшими учителями о том, где вам нужны более сильные границы. Каждый раз, когда кто-то пересекает черту, он показывает вам, где вам нужно построить более крепкий забор. Но вот где большинство людей ошибается. Они пытаются установить границы из гнева или страха. Они делают драматические заявления или полностью отрезают людей, не установив сначала четкие, спокойные и последовательные ограничения. Революция границ – это о том, чтобы устанавливать границы с достоинством и самоуважением, не из мести или возмездия. Начните с создания того, что я называю планом границ. Это четкая карта ваших неприемлемых вещей, поведения и обращения, которые вы будете и не будете принимать в своей жизни. Это не о контроле других, это о том, чтобы быть ясным в том, в чем вы будете участвовать, а в чем нет. Например, если кто-то постоянно игнорирует ваши чувства, ваша граница может быть: «Мне нужно, чтобы мои чувства были признаны и уважены в разговорах». Когда они игнорируются, я спокойно скажу об этом и, если необходимо, закончу разговор, пока мы не сможем общаться уважительно. Ключ в том, чтобы сделать ваши границы о вас и ваших реакциях, а не о контроле или изменении другого человека. Вместо того, чтобы говорить «вы должны прекратить игнорировать мои чувства», вы скажете «я удалюсь из разговоров, где мои чувства игнорируются». Этот сдвиг в языке и фокусе имеет решающее значение, потому что он возвращает силу в ваши руки. Вы больше не ждете, пока кто-то другой изменится. Вы берете на себя ответственность за свой собственный опыт. Пятый и последний способ справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, я называю протоколом Феникса. Это о том, как восстать из пепла боли, сильнее, мудрее и более аутентичный, чем прежде. Он назван в честь мифического Феникса, потому что воплощает тот же принцип – способность восстать обновленным из пламени невзгод. Протокол Феникса отличается от других подходов тем, что он не просто о том, как справляться с болью. Это о том, чтобы использовать ее как катализатор для полной личной трансформации. Это о том, чтобы превратить наши самые глубокие раны в нашу самую большую мудрость. Подумайте об этом. Каждый раз, когда кто-то вас ранит, они создают трещину в вашем существующем мировоззрении. Но что если вместо того, чтобы пытаться заделать эти трещины, вы использовали их как опенингс для нового света? Что если каждая боль станет возможностью для прорыва, а не для разрушения? Этот протокол включает 3 фазы – признание, реконструкция и перерождение. На фазе признания вы полностью осознаете не только то, что произошло, но и кем вы были, когда это произошло. Какие убеждения, модели или уязвимости сделали эту боль возможной? Это не о вине, это о честной саморефлексии. На фазе реконструкции вы начинаете восстанавливать не только свое доверие или уверенность, но и весь ваш способ существования в мире. Это то время, когда вы исследуете свои убеждения о Служат ли эти убеждения вам? Они истинны или это остатки защит от прошлых ран? Фаза перерождения – это то, где происходит магия. Это то время, когда вы сознательно выбираете, кем хотите стать в свете этого опыта. Вместо того, чтобы позволить боли определять вас, Вы используете ее как трамплин для становления еще более аутентичной, мощной версии себя. Я видела, как люди используют протокол Феникса, чтобы трансформировать разрушительные предательства в непоколебимое доверие к себе. Я наблюдала, как люди превращают профессиональные неудачи в истории успеха предпринимателей. Я видела, как люди используют свои глубочайшие раны как мотивацию для создания положительных изменений в мире. Но вот важный момент о протоколе Феникса. Это не одноразовый процесс. Точно так же, как Феникс восстает снова и снова, мы тоже должны быть готовы постоянно эволюционировать и трансформироваться. Каждая боль становится возможностью для нового восстания, нового становления. По мере того, как мы приближаемся к концу нашего времени вместе сегодня, я хочу, чтобы вы поняли нечто жизненно важное. Эти 5 способов справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, это не просто техники или стратегии. Это пути к личной силе. Это инструменты для превращения вашей боли в цель, вашей боли в исцеление и ваших трудностей в трансформацию. Помните, вы не просто учитесь справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят. Вы учитесь становиться тем, кого не может сломать боль, тем, кто знает, как трансмутировать боль в силу, тем, кто понимает, что хотя мы не всегда можем контролировать то, что с нами происходит, мы всегда можем контролировать, кем мы становимся из-за этого. На нашей следующей встрече мы углубимся в более продвинутые применения этих методов. Мы исследуем, как комбинировать их в различных ситуациях, как справляться с конкретными типами боли и, что самое важное, как поддерживать свой прогресс даже когда сталкиваетесь с новыми трудностями. Но сейчас я хочу, чтобы вы начали с одного из этих подходов.
Выберите тот, который наиболее сильно резонирует с вами. Возможно, это метод зеркала, обращение внутрь, чтобы понять свои реакции. Может быть, это подход алхимика, обучение превращению боли в силу. Или, возможно, рамка свободы, освобождение себя от тюрьмы обиды. Что бы вы ни выбрали, помните это. Человек, который вас ранил, мог написать главу в вашей истории, но они не могут написать ваш финал. Эта сила принадлежит вам, и только вам. Потратьте сейчас минуту, чтобы поразмышлять о том, что вы узнали. Почувствуйте сдвиг в вашем восприятии, открытие новых возможностей, потому что именно в этом и заключается суть этой работы. Не просто справляться с людьми, которые вас ранят, а становиться тем, кто знает свою силу, тем, кто не может быть уменьшен действиями других. Путь, который мы начали сегодня, это только начало. Есть еще так много, что можно исследовать, так много инструментов и идей, которые можно поделиться. Но сейчас знайте одно. Вы уже сильнее, чем вы осознаете. Тот факт, что вы здесь, учитесь и растете, это доказывает. И с этими инструментами, о которых мы говорили сегодня, вы собираетесь стать еще сильнее.